What if the next global economic crisis doesn't begin with a sudden crash, but with silence? No ringing bells on Wall Street. No dramatic stock market freefall on the evening news. No single event you can point to and say, that's where it started. Instead, imagine an economy that looks stable on the surface, jobs numbers holding, markets fluctuating but not collapsing, governments reassuring everyone that things are under control. And yet, beneath that calm exterior, pressure is building. Debt quietly compounds, productivity slows, inequality deepens. Geopolitical tensions reshape trade. By 2026, the global economy may not be asking if a crisis is coming, but what kind? Is the world sleepwalking into a new financial shock? Or have we learned enough from past disasters to avoid repeating history? Tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain slowly on the forces shaping the global economy in 2026, and why the warning signs look uncomfortably familiar. Setting the stage, history, and systems. To understand where we might be going, we need to understand the system we're standing on. The modern global economy is built on three pillars: debt, confidence, and interconnection. Since the end of World War II, the world has relied on expanding credit to fuel growth. Governments borrow, corporations borrow, households borrow. Debt isn't inherently bad, it can accelerate development, but only as long as growth stays ahead of interest. That balance has broken before. In 1929, leverage and speculation outpaced real economic value. In 2008, cheap money, complex financial products, and housing bubbles collapsed an interconnected system. In 2020, a global shutdown revealed how fragile supply chains and labor markets truly were. Each crisis was different, but they shared one trait. They all seemed manageable, until they weren't. After 2020, central banks rewrote the rulebook. Trillions of dollars were created. Interest rates dropped to historic lows, then surged at historic speed. Governments expanded deficits to prevent social collapse. It worked temporarily, but every rescue planted the seeds of the next dilemma. And by 2026, we may be living with the consequences. Fact I. Origins: how pressure began building. The origins of today's economic tension didn't start in 2026. They began years earlier, quietly. After the pandemic, economies reopened, but not evenly. Supply chains fractured. Labor markets tightened. Energy prices surged. Inflation returned for the first time in decades. Central banks responded aggressively. Interest rates rose faster than at almost any point in modern history. This created a delayed effect. Higher rates didn't just slow spending, they repriced the entire global economy. Governments suddenly faced soaring debt servicing costs. Businesses dependent on cheap loans struggled to refinance. Housing markets cooled. Investment slowed. At the same time, demographic shifts accelerated. Aging populations in developed economies reduced workforce growth. Productivity gains failed to compensate. Meanwhile, emerging markets faced currency pressure as capital flowed back toward higher-yielding assets in the West. The world didn't collapse, but it didn't reset either. Instead, it entered a fragile equilibrium. Act 2. The Rise. A fragile recovery. By the mid-2020s, headlines spoke of resilience. Stock markets adapted. Inflation moderated in some regions. Employment numbers stabilized, but beneath the recovery was a troubling pattern. Growth became increasingly uneven. A handful of large corporations dominated profits. Asset owners benefited from higher prices, while wage growth lagged behind living costs in many countries. Housing affordability declined. Young generations accumulated less wealth than those before them. Governments, constrained by debt and political pressure, relied on short-term fixes rather than structural reform. Meanwhile, global trade was quietly transforming. Supply chains became more regional. Trade blocs hardened. Sanctions, tariffs, and strategic resource controls replaced globalization's free-flowing optimism. This reduced efficiency and raised costs. The economy wasn't overheating. It was losing flexibility. And rigid systems don't bend well under stress. The breaking point, where things begin to strain. Every crisis has a moment when pressure becomes visible. In 2026, that breaking point may not look like a crash, but like a series of manageable failures. A government struggles to roll over its debt. A major bank tightens lending after unexpected losses. A housing market stalls, dragging down construction and consumption. A geopolitical shock disrupts energy or food supplies. Each event alone seems survivable. But together, they form a chain reaction. Higher interest rates mean governments must cut spending or raise taxes, slowing growth further. Slower growth makes debt harder to manage. Financial institutions become cautious, reducing credit. Businesses delay hiring and investment. Consumers pull back. Confidence, one of the pillars of the system, begins to erode, and once confidence breaks, numbers follow. Act 4. The Fallout. Who pays the price? Economic fallout is never evenly distributed. If the global economy stumbles in 2026, the most vulnerable will feel it first. Developing nations may face capital flight and currency devaluation. Middle-class households may confront job insecurity and rising living costs. Small businesses may struggle to survive tighter credit conditions. Even wealthy economies aren't immune. High public debt limits fiscal responses. Political polarization slows decision-making. Central banks face an impossible choice: support growth and risk inflation, or fight inflation and risk recession. History shows us that crises don't just damage economies, they reshape societies. Trust in institutions weakens. Populism rises, long-term planning gives way to short-term survival. And the global system becomes less cooperative right when cooperation is needed most. Act V failed fixes. WHY old solutions may not work. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many of the tools used to fight past crises are less effective today. Interest rates can't fall indefinitely. Debt can't grow faster than income forever. Money creation loses power when confidence declines. Structural problems like productivity stagnation, inequality, and demographic decline can't be solved by stimulus alone. And yet, policy responses often repeat familiar patterns. Delay the pain. Shift the burden. Hope growth returns before consequences arrive. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Modern parallels and shocking patterns. Look closely, and the patterns repeat. Before 1929, rising inequality and speculative excess. Before 2008, cheap credit and blind faith in financial engineering. Before 2020, over-optimized systems with no margin for shock. Before 2026, high debt. Geopolitical fragmentation, slowing productivity. Public trust under strain. Different era, same rhythms. History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Conclusion: 3 takeaways. So, are we heading for a new global economic crisis? Here are 3 clear takeaways. First, crises rarely arrive as surprises. The warning signs are visible long before the headlines change. Second, the greatest risk in 2026 may not be collapse but complacency. Assuming this time is different has never aged well. Third, economic resilience isn't built through emergency fixes, but through long-term reform, productivity, fairness, and adaptability. The real question isn't whether a crisis will happen. It's whether we recognize the moment we're in before pressure becomes panic. Final warning and call to action. The global economy in 2026 stands at a crossroads. One path leads to gradual adjustment, difficult, slow, but manageable. The other leads to disruption, sudden, painful, and transformative. Which path we take depends on choices being made right now. If you want to understand the forces shaping your future, your job, your savings, your cost of living, this conversation matters. If this video challenged your assumptions, like the video. If you want deeper analysis beyond the headlines, subscribe. And tell us in the comments, do you think the world is prepared for the next economic shock, or are we repeating history once again? Because the most dangerous crises are the ones we see coming and choose to ignore.